Welcome, future farmers. My name is Kelly Alsop. I am an extension educator for University of Illinois in horticulture. I serve Livingston, McLean, and Woodford counties. My past professional experiences included implementing biological controls as part of an integrated pest management program in both research and retail greenhouses. However, today I'm here to talk about another insect service that co evolved 50 million years ago with the invention of flowers, called pollination. As part of this first session on pollination and pollinators, you will learn about some common pollinators in Illinois, gain a greater understanding of pollination and its role in production, what that means to you as a fruit and vegetable grower. We will then discuss honeybees and other bees as a management tool in production. Lastly, we will cover two University of Illinois resources. The first being the Pollinatarium, which is the first freestanding building dedicated to educating the public on pollination, and the second being the Bee Spotter program. It enables citizen scientists to track species of bees in Illinois. Here are some facts on pollinators. Many plants, cultivated or wild, cannot reproduce without the assistance of an annual pollinator, whether that be bees, butterflies, moths, beetles, flies, birds, or bats. Over 130 of our food crops in the United States are dependent on pollinators to form fruits. Many of our supermarkets and farm stands would be empty without the assistance of pollinators like the honeybee. Pollination is estimated to be worth $15 billion in crop value. To the left, I want to talk about a few Illinois pollinators. The top left is a ruby-throated hummingbird. It is the only species of hummingbird in Illinois, and it is known to frequent tubular-shaped flowers with copious amounts of nectar, trapping pollen on its feathers. The middle left is a white-lined sphinx moth, and it can be seen hovering like a hummingbird at dusk on blooms during the fall. The bottom left picture is a goldenrod soldier beetle that not only looks for pollen and nectar in the blooms, but eats any small invertebrates in its path. The top right is a monarch butterfly. It pollinates bold-colored flowers with landing platforms. The middle right is a hooverfly, which is a bee mimic. Feeds on pollen and nectar. The larva of this fly is an aphid-eating maggot that is very common in garden plants. In the bottom right picture is a Katydid Hunter. This Katydid Hunter feeds on nectar and pollen as an adult and also captures katydids, brings them back to its nest, lays an egg on the paralyzed body for the larva to eat once hatched. In this slide, we will discuss the parts of the flowers and how some species house separate female and male flowers on the same plant. Some species have separate male and female plants, and some species have flowers with male and female parts. In this diagram, we see the stem and the petals The petals are used to attract insects. And on the inside, we see the sexual organs. The male sexual organs is called the stamen, and this is made up of anther and filament. The anther contains the pollen sacs that produce the pollen, and the filament is used for support. The female parts are called the pistil. This is made up of stigma, style, and ovary. The stigma is sticky to attract the pollen grain. When the pollen grain reaches the stigma, it germinates and grows a tube down the style. It then fertilizes the ovules that are inside of the ovary. The ovules, once fertilized, will stimulate growth of the ovary. The ovules are seeds and the ovary is fruits. Some flowers, like the one pictured in the diagram, have both female and male parts on the same flower. Apples fall into this category. Some plants have male and female flowers on separate plants. This is known as dioecious, and asparagus falls into this category. Squash plants have separate female and male flowers on the same plant. The top picture shows a male flower composed of anther and filament. In the picture, you can see squash bees covered in pollen. The bottom picture is a female flower with a stigma, a style, and an ovary. The female flower will become bulbous at the base when pollinated. Squash plants produce 3 times more male flowers than female flowers, and each plant really only needs a few male flowers to produce fruit. So some growers opt to harvest the male flowers before they open and eat them at a time when there's not much to eat. In this slide, we will cover some definitions. The first is pollination. This is the activity that transfers the pollen from the male parts of the flower to the receptive stigma in the female parts of the flower. The second definition is fertilization. This occurs when a compatible pollen grain attaches to the stigma and germinates, forming a pollen tube to the undeveloped ovules of the ovary. The transformation of these undeveloped ovules to viable seed then triggers the surrounding ovary to form your fruits. Some plants are self-incompatible and must be crossed with pollen by a genetically different but closely related plant for fertilization to occur. Apples, crabapples, some plums, blueberries, some grapes, and hazelnuts fall into this category and can never be pollinated by their own species. So growers will employ pollinators. An example of this is used for cross-pollination of Golden Delicious and Jonathan apples with crabapples. These crabapple pollinators are planted every 10 feet next to the row. Some species of plants that are not pollinated by animal pollinators, like bees, may be self-pollinating like tomato or wind-pollinating like corn. In the tomato flower pictured here, the structure of the flower causes it to be self-pollinating. The stigma of the flower must grow through a sheath of anthers. However, we find that bumblebees can effectively buzz the pollen from these small flowers. Corn is wind pollinated. The male flower, known as the tassel, releases pollen that is picked up by the silks of the female. In this slide, we learn more about pollen. Pollen is a dust-like grain that is unique to each type of flower. Pollen gathers on the bodies of animals, while most are actually retrieving the nectar. Bees tend to confine their attention to a single flowering species, therefore favoring cross-pollination. Honeybees collect the pollen to feed their larvae. This pollen contains proteins, starches, sugars, fats, and minerals. We also know that chemistry plays a part in animal pollination. The pollen is negatively charged and attracted to the positive charge of the bees. Nectar is the sweet liquid found at the base of the petals in a flower and is the reward given to the pollinators for their service. Nectar is the base ingredient of honey. In this slide, we find a list of fruits and vegetables that must be visited by animal pollinators, mostly bees, in order to produce fruits. Without bees, we would not have apples, cherries, cucumbers, pumpkins, raspberries, squash, sunflower, or watermelon. In this slide, there is a list of fruits and vegetables that will increase their yield if pollinators are employed during production. These plants include apricot, eggplant, grapes, nectarines, okra, and strawberries. Asparagus and horseradish do not need pollinators to produce stems or roots, but do require pollinators if viable seed is desired. Asparagus is a dioecious plant, meaning male and female flowers are on separate plants. In this slide, we show the cross-section of an apple, showing the development of the ovary and the ovules, which is the fruit and the seeds. You'll see here there are 10 seeds per fruit. This means that all of the flower has been pollinated and fully fertilized. A misshapen fruit or a fruit with poor weight is a good indication the flowers did not get fully pollinated during the flower blooming period. In this slide, Stu Jacobson of the Illinois Queen Initiative gives a very good example of how pollinators can increase a yield in strawberries. The honeybees greatly improved the berry set, the weight, and the shape in his study. There was a 439% increase in insect-pollinated plots versus those that were caged. To develop a large, plump fruit, each strawberry flower needs to be visited between 16 and 25 times by an animal pollinator, or, again, like the apple, you will have lopsided, smaller fruit that may be unmarketable. When we talk about animal pollinators, the primary pollinator of cultivated vegetables and fruits are the honeybees. There are many reasons that honeybees are great pollinators for fruit and vegetable producers. Number one is they can be easily moved to a location to employ pollination services. And then they can be easily removed after the blooming period is over or before any harmful pesticides may be used on the farm. Another thing is they do not have to be managed like other bees, but have a caretaker who is also interested in finding nectar and pollen source for their bees. Jacobson, in addition to renting honeybees, also recommends the management of the other bees because they can withstand colder temperatures, have more foraging behavior, and are overall more efficient pollinators than honeybees. Most are solitary, unlike the honeybee or the bumblebee, and live in the ground or the hollow tip of a stem. Some practices we employ during spring cleanup are not advantageous to these native honeybees, like tilling or mowing. Some examples of native bees requiring management inputs are leafcutter bees, mason bees, carpenter bees, and squash bees. By establishing nesting sites and other sources of pollen besides the fruit and vegetable crops that you are growing. Stu Jacobson encourages a mixed pollinator approach by renting honeybees, providing habitat, culturing native bees, and buying bumblebee colonies for your farm. In session 2 of the Pollinator discussion for future farmers, on July 19th, we will discuss the concepts of pollination syndrome, give information on how to use and rent honeybees for pollination needs of the farmer, gain a greater understanding of colony collapse disorder and honeybees, gain a list of pollinator safe and unsafe pesticides, learn information on management and culture of native bees and how to create habitat, and learn about buying and implementing bumblebees as pollinators. Before I leave you, I'd like to talk about 2 University of Illinois resources on pollinators. The Pollinatarium is the first freestanding building dedicated to science, devoted to flowering plants and their pollinators. It is filled with educational displays on ecology, bees, and different pollinators throughout Illinois. This center was influenced by Gene Robinson and May Berenbaum of the University of Illinois. It also houses the infamous Bee Spotter program. The Bee Spotter program is a University of Illinois web-based citizen scientist effort launched in 2007 to engage the public to monitor honeybees and native bumblebees in Illinois. One result of this Bee Spotter program was the discovery of the rusty patch bumblebee that was previously thought to be extinct from Illinois. One thing about this U of I web-based program is you can upload pictures of bees that you have from the farm and have them identified by entomologists from the University of Illinois. Therefore, you are able to track the native bees that visit your farms.